This is the story of Taylor Pomaski, a 29-year-old woman whose sudden disappearance in 2021 shook the state of Texas to its core. What looked at first like a simple missing persons case soon spiraled into something far darker, a chilling mystery tied to a former NFL player, a toxic relationship, and an ending no one could have imagined. There were no screams that night, no frantic calls for help. Not a single alarm was triggered. All anyone noticed was a brief fire in the backyard. Small, quick, gone before the sun came up. Taylor was last seen at her home in Spring, Texas, during what was supposed to be nothing more than a low-key gathering. Friends, drinks, music. The kind of night you wouldn't think twice about. But what happened after that fractured her family, stunned her community, and quietly launched one of Harris County's most meticulous homicide investigations in years. Taylor had been dating Kevin Ware Jr., a former NFL tight end, for several months. On the surface, the couple kept to themselves, but friends and family could feel it, the tension between them. They didn't know how bad it had become, only that something wasn't right. It all came to a head on Sunday, April 25th, 2021. Guests arrived expecting an easy evening, nothing more than a casual hangout. At first it was laughter, drinks, conversations. But witnesses remembered a shift, an argument between Taylor and Ware that grew heated. Taylor looked upset, unsettled. One guest swore she wanted to leave, but never got the chance. Another went further, claiming she had been locked in a room for part of the night. By midnight, people began trickling out, and when the house finally quieted, Taylor Pomaski was gone. Her car still sat in the driveway. Inside, her purse, her phone, even her dog, everything she loved, was untouched. Yet no one called 911. No one filed a missing persons report. Days turned into weeks, and her absence went unnoticed by police. There was no loud warning, only silence. Her texts stopped being answered. She stopped calling her mom, something she never missed. Messages piled up, unread. By May, her parents, living out of state, grew alarmed. It had been a week with no contact. They reached out to police. The initial report was simple. A 29-year-old woman, last seen on April 25th at a residence on Stallion Brook Lane. Officers arrived for a welfare check, but on the surface, nothing looked suspicious. No forced entry, no blood, no sign that Taylor had packed up and left. But people don't just vanish into thin air. Not in a quiet suburb north of Houston. Spring is the kind of place lined with neat brick homes, tidy lawns, and a calm that can be deceptive. Neighbors notice when someone disappears, but it often takes a voice, someone willing to step forward before action is taken. At first, police thought Taylor might have left on her own, but her relationship history raised concerns. In fact, just weeks before that night, there had been a domestic disturbance. Taylor had confided in a friend that she was scared, but she never filed a report. Then came a clue that troubled investigators even more. After April 25th, Taylor's digital footprint vanished. No bank withdrawals, no phone pings, no social media activity, nothing. In today's world, people don't just disappear like that, not without help. The timeline of her final hours was hazy. Between 10:30 p.m. and midnight, Taylor was last seen alive. After that, no one could say where she went, or if she ever left that house at all. There were no rideshare records, no outgoing calls that night. Either the streets were cloaked in darkness, or the neighborhood's security cameras had all decided to fail at the same time. When police canvassed the area, most neighbors couldn't offer much, just memories of shouting and music that carried late into the night. But then, one woman shared something she hadn't told anyone before. She remembered seeing smoke rising from the backyard. It wasn't a huge fire, nothing alarming, just a faint glow, the kind you'd assume was someone burning trash. At the time, it felt insignificant. But investigators didn't take it that way. They quietly filed it away, knowing even the smallest detail could matter. When detectives went back to the house for another walkthrough, this time they came with luminol. They sprayed the kitchen hallway, the back entrance, places where someone might have tried to hide what really happened. Nothing dramatic showed up. No heavy bleeding, no drag marks. But still, something felt wrong. The bathroom looked almost unnaturally clean. The grout between the tiles had been freshly bleached, as if someone had scrubbed every inch with intent. Yet there were no receipts, no record of a professional cleaning service. Instead of easing suspicions, the spotless surfaces made things worse, because sometimes it isn't what you find that unsettles investigators. It's what's missing. And so the questions grew louder. Who was the last person Taylor spoke to that night? Who stayed after the party was over? And why would anyone go to such lengths to clean a bathroom right after a guest vanished into thin air? Investigators started circling in on Taylor's closest connections, looking at who had been in that house, who left early, and who already carried a record. One name rose above the rest, someone whose shadow seemed to stretch across everyone tied to the case. But legally, the file still carried just one label: missing person. No body, no confirmed crime scene, no eyewitness testimony. All police had was a young woman who walked into the night and never came back. If Taylor had been alive, maybe police would have connected the dots sooner, but clarity only came too late. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, those closest to her noticed something was changing. Friends, co-workers, even relatives said she had grown distant, slow to respond to texts, canceling plans at the last minute, and when she did reply, her tone was clipped and detached. When investigators reviewed her messages, they found entire conversations deleted. What little remained told its own story. Taylor was under immense pressure at home. She never spelled it out directly, speaking instead in vague terms. It's just been intense. Or, maybe we're figuring things out. And on more than one occasion she admitted she was scared, but she never said why. There were no police reports filed, no restraining orders, no protective measures, just silence. But then came a late-night call, one that investigators would never forget. March 28th, just 4 weeks before Taylor disappeared. The call lasted under 5 minutes. A friend later recalled Taylor's voice was low, barely a whisper, as if she didn't want someone to overhear. She sounded disoriented, on edge. And in that hushed conversation, Taylor said something chilling. "If something happens to me, please remember this." She never explained what this meant. The call ended quickly, and the chance to ask more slipped away. By then, Taylor's name was already known to local police. Just a week later, on April 7th, the Harris County Sheriff's Office got a call about a domestic disturbance at her address on Stallion Brook Lane. Officers responded. They found tension, raised voices, a heated argument, but no visible injuries, no evidence of assault. Taylor chose not to press charges and refused to write a formal statement. Following protocol, the deputies left. The report was logged, filed, and eventually archived. Just another forgotten entry. In the days after that domestic dispute, Taylor began to fade from view. She'd once been the type to post on Instagram weekly, snapshots of her life, small updates here and there. But suddenly everything went quiet. At work, she started missing days. Not often at first, but enough that people noticed. And then, she even skipped a scheduled civil court appointment. For someone her co-workers described as punctual and reliable, it was out of character. There wasn't one single alarming event, just a buildup of smaller, quieter signs. Later, when investigators combed through her digital footprint, they found something strange in her Gmail account, a draft email. It had been opened, edited, and saved multiple times in late April. The subject line read, "In case you need to know." The body of the message was mostly empty except for one chilling line. "I didn't fall off the radar." And at the very bottom, a final sentence. "They pushed me." Forensic analysts tried to piece together earlier versions of the draft, hoping to uncover what she'd deleted or whether the message had ever been sent. They came up empty. The draft just sat there in her account, never sent, never erased, like a warning frozen in time. Police eventually brought in behavioral experts to assess Taylor's situation. Based on her recent patterns, pulling back from friends, hinting at fear, becoming more isolated, skipping obligations, the analysts concluded she had been a high-risk case for domestic abuse. But that conclusion came only after she was already gone. Her friends painted a strikingly consistent picture when questioned. Over and over, they told investigators the same thing. Taylor would confide a worry, then immediately downplay it. She'd brush it off, insist she was being overly dramatic, or twist her fear into a joke. One friend remembered Taylor saying, "Sometimes he scares me," but she'd laughed it away, as though the words didn't matter. About a week before the house party, Taylor had a more honest conversation with a former roommate. She admitted she was thinking about leaving, but said she needed more time. She didn't want to make things worse by rushing. She was cautious, too cautious. And then came the party. In hindsight, investigators would emphasize one haunting detail. Taylor had spoken to multiple people about her unease. Everyone had heard pieces of it, but no one recognized the full weight of what she was trying to say. Her warnings never turned into action, and by the time police finally performed a welfare check, Taylor had already been missing for nearly 2 weeks. As detectives dug through her personal life and digital history, the truth sharpened into focus. Taylor Pomaski hadn't simply vanished overnight. She had been unraveling for weeks. Her official missing person report didn't come until May 9, 2021. Mother's Day. After more than a week of silence, Taylor's parents reached out to authorities in Harris County. She had stopped answering calls, stopped returning texts, and most telling of all, there was no post, no phone call, no message for her mother on that holiday. That silence was what finally broke through their worry and pushed them to call for help. 2 patrol officers were dispatched to her last known address in Spring, Texas. The house was locked. Taylor's car sat parked outside, untouched. There were no signs of forced entry, no immediate indicators of foul play. When officers contacted the homeowner, they were told Taylor had simply left on foot several days earlier and never returned. But when pressed for details, what she was wearing, what time she left, where she might have gone, the answers grew vague, too vague. The incident was recorded as a routine welfare check, non-criminal. Officers logged the visit, filed the report, and left. It took another 5 days before Taylor's name was officially entered into the National Missing Persons database. The delay wasn't against the law, but it came at a cost. Those first few days are crucial in any disappearance, and by the time her case was logged, time-sensitive evidence had already slipped away. Surveillance cameras from homes, nearby shops, and even traffic intersections had already overwritten their footage. That trail was gone before anyone thought to check it. By midday, the Missing Persons Unit did raise the urgency of her case, but it was still handled as a typical adult disappearance. That classification came with limits. No Amber Alert, no massive search operation, no coordinated volunteer effort. Interviews stayed confined to close friends and family. And while some detectives inside the department were already uneasy, procedure kept the case boxed in. Those detectives had reason to worry. Taylor had no history of running off, no pending legal battles, and her finances had gone completely silent. Her bank account showed no activity. Her phone hadn't made a single call, hadn't sent a single text since April 25th. It wasn't hitting any towers at all. That could mean one of three things. It was dead, destroyed, or sitting somewhere with no signal. Any way you looked at it, the silence was unnatural. But on paper, the rules still said the same thing. Adults in Texas, like in most states, can vanish by choice. Unless there's proof of foul play, the law doesn't immediately force a deeper search. That began to shift when investigators pulled up body cam footage from April 7th, the domestic disturbance call made just 18 days before Taylor went missing. On the video, Taylor appears briefly. She's soft-spoken, stiff, avoiding eye contact with the deputies. One of them asks her directly if she feels safe. She pauses, then nods quietly, offering no further words. She declined to press charges. She wouldn't even write out a statement. The man at the center of the argument stayed mostly out of frame. That night, officers closed the case and left. Looking back on that footage after Taylor's disappearance gave it a heavier, almost haunting weight. What once looked like a minor argument now stood out as a warning sign no one acted on. By May, investigators secured a warrant for Taylor's phone and Google activity. One detail stopped them cold. Her last recorded search was made on April 24th, the night before she disappeared. What to pack if you have to leave quickly? The words had been typed into the search bar, but never submitted. The draft query just sat there. To detectives, it suggested she had been preparing to leave, or at least believed she might have to. After that, though, her digital trail ended completely. No logins, no password resets, no signs of a new SIM card. Nothing. Just silence. During neighborhood canvassing, one neighbor mentioned something odd in the days right after the party. Taylor's dog, normally kept inside, was suddenly outside, roaming the backyard alone. At the time, the neighbor didn't think much of it. Maybe the owners were gone for a weekend. But in hindsight, paired with everything else, it became one more troubling detail. And that was the problem. So many small things, each unsettling, but all disconnected at first. By the time detectives began connecting the dots, critical evidence was already gone. The garbage had been collected twice. Footage from the only nearby gas station camera was long overwritten. Phone numbers in Taylor's recent call history now led nowhere, some disconnected, some reassigned. Detectives issued broad subpoenas for cell phone activity within a 500-meter radius of her house between 9 p.m. and 3 a.m. on the night she vanished. But processing that much raw data would take weeks. In a later internal memo, one detective wrote, "We didn't miss the window. We didn't know there was a window." By June, the case finally shifted. Taylor's disappearance was no longer considered voluntary. It was officially reclassified as suspicious circumstances. That one change brought in more weight. Homicide liaisons, forensic specialists, and expanded digital surveillance resources. But by then, they were already months behind the night it all began. Still, investigators had no traditional crime scene, no visible blood, no murder weapon, no confession. On paper, all they had was a missing woman, a house full of unanswered questions, and a growing suspicion that something irreversible had taken place behind those walls. By June 2021, even the language in internal memos reflected that uneasy shift. Taylor Pomaski's case was no longer categorized as a routine missing persons report. Despite the fact that no body had been found, it was now being treated as a suspected homicide. That shift wasn't triggered by a dramatic confession or an eyewitness stepping forward. Instead, it came from the sheer weight of what wasn't there, what the evidence failed to show. The first major step was to circle back to the house where Taylor had last been seen. The home had already been walked through in early May, but only in a surface-level way. Detectives had performed a routine check, permission to enter, a quick visual sweep, and general observations. Nothing glaring had jumped out at the time. But now, with weeks of silence and digital records proving Taylor hadn't used her phone or logged into her account since April 25th, the sheriff's office authorized a far more aggressive forensic search. This time, the objective was crystal clear. Investigators weren't looking for what was obvious. They were looking for what someone had worked hard to erase. Chemical residues, accelerants, biological traces, or structural changes that didn't fit with normal wear and tear. It was less about finding blood spatter on the walls, and more about uncovering what had been scrubbed away. Their attention quickly zeroed in on the master bathroom. At first glance, it looked spotless. Too spotless. The grout lines in the shower gleamed unnaturally bright, showing signs of heavy, aggressive scrubbing. Reagent testing confirmed it. Strong cleaning agents like bleach and ammonia had been used. On its own, that wasn't enough to raise alarms. Plenty of people deep clean their bathrooms. But when investigators swabbed the lower seams of the tile and pulled environmental samples from the porous surfaces, they uncovered something that bleach couldn't completely destroy. Microscopic traces of organic material were hidden there. Later, lab analysis confirmed it. Blood proteins. And the DNA matched Taylor Pomaski. It was only trace amounts, invisible to the naked eye, but enough to suggest she had bled in that bathroom. It wasn't definitive proof of a homicide, but it was enough for detectives to reclassify the house as a potential crime scene. Then came another lead, a neighbor's offhand remark about a backyard fire on the night of April 25th. Investigators widened their search and combed through the yard. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Fire pits are common in Texas, and backyard burning isn't exactly rare. But this time, context mattered. Soil samples were taken from a charred patch near the property line. Despite recent rainfall, the ground still bore scorched marks, and the grass had not fully grown back. That allowed forensic teams to pull samples for testing. The results were grim. Lab analysis revealed polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, byproducts of burning organic matter. But there was more. The soil also contained chemical markers consistent with the combustion of synthetic fibers, the kind you'd expect from clothing or household fabrics. And most troubling of all, elevated levels of calcium phosphate, a compound most commonly released when bone or tissue is incinerated. No intact fragments of bone, no teeth, no tissue were recovered, but the chemical signature left behind was clear enough. Something biological had been burned there. Whatever had been destroyed in that fire, it wasn't just household trash. Finally, investigators turned their attention to the hallway leading from the bathroom to the back door. They carefully lifted carpet samples and sent them for lab testing. What they found deepened the mystery further. The carpet wasn't just one layer. It was two. A newer layer sat neatly on top, but beneath it, embedded in the foam padding of the older one, were fibers containing blood markers. The DNA profile? Once again, it matched Taylor Pomaski. Though invisible to the naked eye and faint in amount, what investigators uncovered was enough to confirm her presence, enough to suggest something more. No signs of a struggle, no weapon, no pooling of blood, one investigator quietly noted in an addendum. but it's clean in a way people don't clean. When the homeowner was pressed again, their story didn't budge. Taylor had left after an argument, they insisted. No mention of cleaning, no mention of fire in the backyard, no mention of bleach in the shower or charred residue in the soil. The story remained stubbornly flat, but the scene told something different. Detectives brought in mobile forensic imaging, ultraviolet sweeps, infrared photography, every trick they had. Yet the scans showed nothing obvious. No blood patterns, no drag marks. That in itself was revealing. Investigators began using a new word to describe what they were seeing: containment. If something had happened here, it had been managed, not erased, but contained, hidden in plain sight. The absence of evidence was now becoming its own kind of evidence. Meanwhile, analysts combed through what little security footage still existed in the neighborhood. Most recordings had long since been overwritten, but one private camera, perched 3 houses down, caught a strange flicker. A brief flash of light in the backyard, in the earliest hours of April 26th. The timestamp aligned perfectly with the burn pattern later dug up in the soil. The video revealed nothing more, just that one instant of ignition, frozen in time. By this point, investigators were holding on to 3 critical threads: a bathroom scrubbed unnaturally clean but still whispering with traces of blood, a backyard where synthetic and organic material had been burned, and a hallway carpet carrying blood markers that linked one space to the other. Not enough to lay charges, not yet, but enough to sharpen the picture, enough to pass the case upward. From that moment, it was no longer a missing persons file. It was homicide. And then came December 10th, 2021. A call to the Harris County Sheriff's Office. A field technician, part of a land management crew, had stumbled upon something while clearing brush near a drainage ditch outside city limits in North Harris County. Tangled among the overgrowth, half buried in the soil, were fragments of melted fabric, twisted wire, and what first looked like animal bones, blackened, brittle, and charred. Something felt wrong. The worker called his supervisor, who in turn contacted law enforcement. By late afternoon, crime scene investigators were on site. The ditch was remote, overgrown, barely visible from the nearest road, a full 25 miles from Stallion Brook Lane. What they saw immediately confirmed the suspicion. These weren't animal remains. They were human. A forensic anthropologist led the recovery. The soil told a story. Burn marks, scorched patches where flames had torn through. The fragments were brittle, calcined, fractured by intense heat. No full bones remained. Alongside them, melted zippers, warped grommets from athletic wear, blackened eyelets where shoelaces once threaded. Plastic components distorted and slumped from fire. A small scatter of things, but just enough. The remains were delivered to the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences. Forensic odontologists leaned in, studying the maxillary structure, piecing together what was left of the dental fragments. 12 days later, the results arrived. A positive match. The dental records left no doubt. It was Taylor Pomaski. Nearly 8 months had passed since the night she vanished. Now the search had ended, and with that confirmation, the investigation shifted into something heavier, sharper, more urgent. No longer a case of a missing woman. It was the homicide of Taylor Pomaski. Detectives returned to the evidence with new eyes, combing through samples, lab reports, digital records, every scrap of data. They also had a new understanding of where the disposal had occurred. That ditch, remote and forgotten, was almost perfect for concealment. Hidden from the road, out of sight of any cameras, with soft ground easy to dig into. Whoever had left her there hadn't buried her deep. Either they lacked time or they lacked the will. The burn was rushed, unfinished, uneven, but the condition of the remains left a heavy problem. The medical examiner couldn't determine how Taylor died. There were no ligature marks, no bullet fragments, no clear signs of blunt force trauma. A fracture in the skull raised suspicion, but whether it happened before death or after was impossible to say. The final autopsy line was short, almost haunting. Homicidal violence cannot be excluded. Investigators tried to link the burns in the backyard with the burns at the ditch. Too much time had passed for a direct chemical match. But technology offered something else. Geographic profiling software, cell tower pings. When they plotted device activity against the map, a crucial detail surfaced. Roughly 12 hours after Taylor was last seen, a cell phone belonging to her boyfriend pinged a tower that placed him near that very ditch. The signal narrowed to within a 2-mile radius, close enough to encompass the site where her body was found. It wasn't just the discovery of her remains that turned the case. It was the way the threads converged. A home scrubbed with bleach, a backyard where flames once rose, a ditch where burned human remains surfaced months later, all tied together by a single device moving between them, a man with no alibi, and witness accounts that never quite matched. As one detective put it, "We didn't get a confession. We uncovered the infrastructure of concealment. Actions taken to hide a crime no one was ever meant to know about." In the weeks that followed, the district attorney convened a grand jury. They had no weapon, no exact cause of death, no eyewitness to the killing, but they had a body. They had behavior that no innocent explanation could justify. And they had forensic threads that, when woven together, painted a picture far too precise to ignore. Pressure on the case was mounting, and quickly. The moment Taylor Pomaski's remains were officially identified, her family received what little of her body could be returned. At her mother's request, there was no spectacle, just a private ceremony, hushed and intimate, hidden from the public eye. The world at large only learned of it through a short press release. Just a few lines. Confirmation of identity and confirmation that this was no longer a missing person case. It was now a homicide. For months, that quiet, overgrown field had kept its secret, and then it gave it up. The discovery of Taylor's remains marked a pivotal turn. There was no going back. Detectives could no longer lean on the shadows of behavioral suspicion or scattered circumstantial signs. They now held undeniable proof of death. The question shifted, sharp and direct. Not if Taylor had been killed, but who had done it, and how. Investigators went back to the digital trail. A subpoena was issued for historical location data on every mobile device tied to Kevin Ware Jr., Taylor's boyfriend, the man last seen with her alive. What came back was a goldmine. A map of movements built from hundreds of data points, pinning his phone across the days of April 25th and 26th. The pattern was chilling in its clarity. From late afternoon on April 25th until the early morning hours of the 26th, Kevin's phone sat motionless at Stallion Brook Lane. No movement, no interruptions. And then, at precisely 6:13 a.m., it began to stir. It moved west first, then veered north, eventually landing in a rural patch of Harris County, a forgotten stretch off a service road, unincorporated, outside city lines. That exact stop was just 7/10 of a mile from the drainage ditch where Taylor's remains would later be found. The phone stayed there for 22 minutes, and then, just as suddenly, it returned the same way it had come. Investigators combed through months of location history. That morning stop was the only time Kevin's device had visited that spot. Alone, the data wasn't enough to convict, but paired with burn residue at both the house and the ditch, it became a keystone, an anchor in the timeline that prosecutors would lean on heavily. Detectives circled back to the witnesses who had been at the house the night Taylor disappeared. Some shut down, unwilling to speak further. Others repeated what they'd said before. There was tension, Taylor was distressed, and the argument with Kevin had escalated. But one voice added a new detail. Behind closed doors, the fight had grown louder, sharper, more dangerous. Another witness remembered something they hadn't thought twice about before. Just after sunrise on the 26th, the homeowner was outside with a power washer, spraying down the back patio. At the time, it seemed ordinary. But now, with everything lined up, it looked like part of a cleanup. A deliberate attempt to wash away what had happened. Around this time, the walls began to close in on Kevin. While sitting in pretrial detention on unrelated drug and weapons charges, whispers surfaced from inside the jail. Inmates came forward. He had been overheard making comments, vague but heavy, about getting rid of a problem and cleaning it up well. None of it was concrete, none of it admissible on its own. But when the same phrasing spilled from multiple sources, it was difficult to dismiss. It wove neatly into the larger picture: preparation, concealment, premeditation. By the middle of 2022, the district attorney's office was sharpening its blade. Piece by piece, the case was being shaped into an indictment strategy. Yes, there was no murder weapon, no clear cause of death, no eyewitness willing or able to say exactly what they had seen. But there was a body. There was digital evidence. There was forensic residue. And there was behavior that screamed guilt. On July 26th, the grand jury convened for the first time. What had begun as a missing person report was now an unraveling tapestry of lies, timelines, and burned fragments. The beginning of a prosecution built from the ashes of silence. Prosecutors came armed with a layered case. They laid out the cell tower data that tied Kevin Ware directly to the disposal site. They showed the forensic breakdown, chemical and burn residues that matched between the backyard and the ditch. They presented the trace amounts of Taylor's blood hidden inside the home. They pointed to the conflicting witness accounts, the suspicious post-party cleanup, and the whispers of guilt from jailhouse testimony. And then, on July 28th, the decision came down. The grand jury returned its indictment. 1 count of murder, and 1 count of tampering with a human corpse. With those words, Kevin Ware's world shifted. He was moved immediately from federal custody into state custody. In the outside world, his attorneys tried to control the narrative. In a brief but sharp statement, they denied everything. They insisted there was no direct evidence connecting him to Taylor's death, no definitive link, no smoking gun. According to them, this was a case blown out of proportion by the press, a spectacle powered more by public opinion than by facts. But the court wasn't swayed. A no-bond hold was issued. Kevin wasn't going anywhere. Then came one of the most unsettling discoveries. Investigators had seized a second phone tied to Kevin. It had been wiped, factory reset, before police got their hands on it. But digital forensics has a way of reaching into the graveyard of deleted data. From the phone's cached memory, analysts managed to pull fragments of text, and buried in those fragments was a single line that chilled everyone who read it. "It's done. Just like we planned." No timestamp, no recipient, no context. Just those words, lingering in memory around the same time Taylor vanished. It wasn't conclusive, but it was damning. And prosecutors made sure it became part of the evidentiary file. Still, massive questions loomed. What had actually caused Taylor's death? How long had her body been kept inside that house before being moved? And perhaps most haunting of all, had anyone else helped cover it up? Despite the uncertainty, The foundation of the case was unshakable. One prosecutor described it best. It was the convergence of independent anomalies. Small things may be meaningless on their own, but together they told a story that couldn't be ignored. With Kevin now formally charged and awaiting trial, the investigation itself shifted. Active fieldwork slowed. The focus was no longer on chasing leads, but on preparing to stand before a jury. Privately, Taylor's family was told first. The district attorney called her mother himself. Publicly, the statement was brief, just a single line, but powerful. "We believe Taylor's voice is being heard, even now." And with that, the case entered its final phase. The task ahead wasn't just proving Kevin's guilt. It was reconstructing Taylor's last night, building a coherent, provable timeline, piecing together a chain of events that Taylor herself could never tell. The timeline was brutally narrow, less than 12 hours, based on witnesses, digital pings, and forensic testing. Investigators believed the clock started around 11:45 p.m. on April 25, 2021. That was the last time Taylor was seen alive at her own home, during a party. By 6:15 a.m. the following morning, Kevin's phone was pinging near the ditch where her burned remains would later be found. Somewhere in that window, it all happened. Her death, the hurried cleanup, the burning, the disposal. The geolocation data showed Kevin's device stopping briefly in that isolated stretch of North Harris County. Just over 20 minutes. Not long enough for a careful burial. Not long enough for anything meticulous. It was quick, messy, desperate. A hasty attempt to make her disappear. Back at Stallion Brook Lane, forensic specialists kept combing. They found what human eyes couldn't: microscopic traces of blood trapped in the grout of the shower. There were no pools, no clear spatter, just hidden fragments soaked deep into the cracks, refusing to vanish no matter how hard someone had tried to erase them. The bathroom quickly became the focal point of investigators' suspicions. Deep within the grout lines of the shower and sink, forensic teams detected blood proteins, silent evidence lodged in places no bleach could fully reach. Experts testified that the bathroom hadn't just been cleaned, it had been processed. Chemical testing revealed unmistakable traces of a high-strength oxidizer, almost certainly bleach, applied within a narrow 24 to 48-hour window after Taylor disappeared. Plumbing inspections added another chilling layer. The P-traps beneath the sink and shower revealed sludge riddled with irregular residue. Inside that foul mixture were degraded tissue fragments, too broken down for DNA recovery, but still identifiable as organic human matter. To detectives, it was a glaring sign. Someone had attempted to wash away more than just dirt. They were dealing with a deliberate cleanup. Human remains disposed of through the drains. Moving down the hallway toward the backyard, the scene appeared spotless. No obvious blood, no drag marks, no visible stains. But forensic luminol testing told a different story. Beneath the surface of the carpet padding lay faint traces of hemoglobin, a whisper of blood, invisible to the naked eye but impossible to erase entirely. A forensic pathologist advised prosecutors that if Taylor had died, or even collapsed in that bathroom, the fastest route to carry her body would have been down that hallway and out the rear door. The backyard soil agreed. Tests uncovered lingering chemical signatures of fire, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, calcium phosphate, and other byproducts left behind when organic matter burns. These same compounds were later found in the ditch where Taylor's remains were discovered, though not precise enough for a one-to-one match. The picture forming was grim. An attempted burn in the yard, rushed and incomplete, likely abandoned when smoke, odor, or sheer lack of time made it impossible. Attention soon turned back to the suspect's digital footprint. Analysts pulled metadata from deleted files on his secondary phone. Between 3:15 and 5 a.m. on April 26th, he had been exchanging encrypted messages with a known associate, someone with a documented criminal past and close ties to his inner circle. The exchange cut off abruptly at 5:04 a.m., followed by eerie silence. Minutes later, his phone powered down entirely. A forensic anthropologist helped connect the dots with the condition of Taylor's bones. Some fragments bore heavy charring, while others showed almost none. The lack of heat fractures on certain joint surfaces suggested the fire had been patchy and exposed to open air, consistent with an improvised backyard blaze, not a controlled high-heat burn. This clumsy attempt fit the growing narrative. Confrontation, panic, cleanup, and a desperate failure to destroy the evidence. One of the most haunting details came from a neighbor's security system. No video, just audio. At exactly 6:05 a.m., the faint slam of a car door, followed by the low hum of an engine pulling away. It was the very same window in which the suspect's phone began its movement toward the rural ditch, where Taylor's remains were ultimately recovered. The timing was no coincidence. It was the sound of Taylor's final disappearance. When prosecutors layered everything together, chemical residue, biological traces, digital timestamps, and behavioral red flags, the chain of events became undeniable. There wasn't one dramatic smoking gun, but a mosaic of damning anomalies that pointed to the truth. A violent confrontation, a body hidden, then clumsily cleaned, a fire that failed, a hasty disposal in the dead of morning. The story Taylor could never tell was now reconstructed through science, silence, and the shadows left behind. The prosecution's theory didn't need a clear motive. What mattered was opportunity, access, concealment, and control. And Kevin Ware had them all. The investigation had been strained from the start. The long delay in reporting Taylor missing had closed doors investigators might never reopen. But even with those setbacks, when the fragments were lined up, they told a single, deliberate story. A crime, a cover-up, and a final act of disposal. The fire in the field wasn't the beginning. It was the end. A last attempt to erase everything that had happened behind the closed bathroom door. On April 28, 2023, almost 2 years after Taylor Pomaski vanished, the case reached its conclusion. Not through a jury verdict, not with a trial, but with a plea. Kevin Ware Jr., once an NFL tight end and the last known person to see Taylor alive, stood in a Harris County courtroom and admitted guilt. Murder. Tampering with a human corpse. The judge sentenced him to 30 years in state prison. There was no trial, no cross-examination, no witnesses called to the stand, just paperwork and silence. Prosecutors later explained the decision. Despite a mountain of circumstantial and forensic evidence, the case still had holes. No weapon, no cause of death, no eyewitness. To risk a mistrial or years of appeals was too great. A plea deal guaranteed justice would stand. In exchange, Ware's defense team waived all rights to appeal, and the court received what had always been missing, a formal admission of guilt. The sentencing was brief. Taylor's family sat in silence. No victim impact statement, no public outpouring. Hours later, the Harris County Sheriff's Office issued a short press release. The case was closed. For detectives who had chased leads for nearly 2 years, it wasn't closure. It was fact. Cold, unbending fact. But even with the case closed, haunting questions lingered. Weeks before her disappearance, Taylor had called police. She had told friends she was scared. Her relationship showed every warning sign: volatility, control, isolation. Yet none of it sparked immediate legal action. In hindsight, the pieces were painfully clear. The April 7th 9/11 call, the skipped appointments, her sudden silence. Alone, each seemed small. Together, they painted the truth. Too late to save her. And Taylor's case wasn't an outlier. Across the United States, women in abusive relationships faced the same deadly blind spot. Without visible injuries or official complaints, their cries for help too often fade into the background. Taylor's story became one more example, tragic, preventable, and impossible to ignore. In the weeks after the sentencing, her name began to resurface in a different way. Domestic violence prevention groups used her timeline, her fear, her isolation, her sudden digital silence as a case study. Her story appeared in flyers, in school presentations, in training seminars, not as a headline anymore, but as a warning. Her family held a quiet memorial at home, no speeches, no statements, just remembrance. In a rare moment of openness, Taylor's mother whispered the truth no one could forget. She kept trying to leave. She just didn't get far. With that, the court closed the file. The plea deal entered into record. Kevin Ware would serve 30 years, with parole eligibility only after 25. An old man before freedom was even a possibility. And yet, Taylor had already written her last words. In the days before she vanished, investigators found a draft email saved in her account. The subject line read, "In case you need to know." It was never sent. The body of the email was almost empty, just 2 sentences. "I didn't fall off the radar. They pushed me. The system listened. But only when it was far too late." If you found this story interesting, hit like and subscribe for more true crime cases. We post fresh stories regularly.